Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Storytime/X/. I read plenty of stories about skinwalkers, flesh gates, goatmen, whatever you want to call them. None of them really spooked me very much, and it's pretty clear that they're mostly made up. Basically a bunch of idiots saying, "I smelled blood and pennies, and then the woods went silent, and then we saw a spooky man with long limbs, and he made a big scream noise." That being said, I've had a couple strange experiences myself. Nothing with off-the-charts action like a lot of stories on this board, but some things that make me reconsider living in remote areas. Let me tell you about one of them. I went camping with two of my buddies about 7 years back. We were backpacking out in the mountainous woods of Montana. Every day we would wake up, hike until about noon, and then find a place to camp for the night and spend the rest of the daylight hours fishing or shooting cans with a BB gun. All of us brought real firearms, but ammo ain't cheap, and they were mostly for emergencies. We had a great first few days. On the fourth day, we must have been about 50 miles from the nearest road. We decided that this would be as far as we would go, and tomorrow we would head back the way we came. We were pretty high up on a hill at this point, and we had a lovely view of the landscape. We found what seemed to be the concrete foundation of a long-since demolished fire watch station and decided it would be a perfect place to camp. We made a fire and then went to sleep pretty early because we were tired as all hell. Later that night, I woke up to take a piss. I walked out to the edge of the concrete platform, and it was basically pitch black outside. The stars were beautiful, though. I remember pointing my flashlight down the hill the way we came because I didn't want to point it at the tents and wake up my buddies. The flashlight was pretty weak, one of those gigantic heavy ones with a dark yellow light that barely lights up 30 feet in front of you. I could just barely make out what I thought was a deer moving across the path we took up the hill, but it was too far for my flashlight to really hit it, and there were about a dozen trees in the way, so I only saw a few flashes of it. After a few seconds, I saw that it was actually a person, and I started to freak out because I assumed it was a ranger that was about to give us hell for lighting a fire without a permit. Every time I looked back, they were a couple feet closer to me, and I could hear them taking slow steps whenever I looked down in an attempt to control my stream. I didn't realize at the time how strange it would be for a ranger to be out wandering without a flashlight at 2 in the morning, but I was tired at the time. I could still only barely make out the rough shape of them in the darkness with my cheap flashlight. But I finished up my piss, and then pointed the flashlight back at the person. They weren't moving toward us anymore, just standing with their arms at their sides. I yelled out to them and asked if they needed something and didn't get a response. At this point, my buddies were awake and they came out of their tents to see what was going on. One of them had a much more powerful flashlight than I did, and he pointed it over to where I was pointing mine. It illuminated the person, and we could all see them pretty clearly now. They were tall, not inhumanly tall, but fairly lanky and probably 6.5 feet tall. The person very clearly had sideways facial features. They weren't bloody or anything. It's not like they were attacked by a bear and it rearranged their face. Their eyes were just sideways. Their mouth was sideways. They were staring directly at us and smiling pretty hard. Although I don't know if I would consider it smiling because it was basically just baring their teeth at us and maintaining eye contact. It was still very far away, probably 100 feet or more, but we could all see its face very clearly. Its eyes were wide enough to see the whites. We were all pretty shocked, and one of my buddies pulled out his gun. As soon as this thing saw the gun, it just sort of coughed, gurgled. It sounded like someone choking on a sneeze. It turned around but kept looking at us over its shoulder as it moved back the way it came from. It wasn't making any sort of effort to stay hidden. And with the bright light from my buddy, we watched it walk into the woods for about 10 minutes before we couldn't see it anymore. All of us were freaking out, and we immediately packed up our camp and lit the fire again. That was the scariest part, packing up the camp, because we couldn't hold our flashlights and survey the woods while we were packing our bags or dismantling the tents. We were hearing plenty of noises, and the entire time it felt like that thing was going to sprint out of the darkness. It never did. We had our rifles out until daylight, and then we hiked faster than I've ever hiked to get out of the woods. We hiked so fast that we were out of there by noon. Threw our stuff into the truck and drove 90 miles per hour, checking the mirrors every 10 seconds. Never saw that thing again. Once we were back in town, we all recounted exactly what we had all seen to each other, and our descriptions of the thing's face were all exactly the same. Wide eyes, sideways features, teeth bared. We were trying for hours to rationalize it, but none of us could figure out why someone would be out in the middle of the woods with no flashlight or backpack, stalking some random hikers in the middle of the night. None of us think it was human, but we've got no explanation either. It's basically just a campfire story for us at this point. But all of us were entirely sober, and we all remember the same thing. It never attacked us. It wasn't bloody or snarling. It didn't make the woods fall silent. It didn't smell like rotting flesh. It was just strange. It looked wrong. It moved wrong. And the scariest part was when we couldn't see it at all, when we didn't know if it was right next to us. We still go camping from time to time, and I have a few more stories that I could tell if anyone is interested. We stick to actual campsites these days, and usually invite more friends than before. Solo backpacking is off the table for me. Here's a funky sketch in Microsoft Paint of what it looked like. Oddly enough, the nose looked fine from what we could see. Aside from the sideways face and being really tall, it looked fairly normal. The part that freaked us out was how it stared and how it moved.
Interesting story, thanks for sharing. Couple questions. Did you think of firing a warning shot towards it at all? Were you tempted to go looking for it in daylight? And did anyone examine where it was standing?
We didn't need to fire any warning shots, although we were all thinking about doing it. As soon as it saw the gun, it started backing away. Maybe some other campers had fired at it before, and it understood what the gun was. We kept our guns loaded and in our hands for the entire journey back. Never wanted to go looking for it during the day. We were freaked out and just wanted to leave. Getting back out there would be a hassle, and we have no idea where it went. We watched it until we couldn't see it anymore, and then stood there for a bit to make sure it didn't come back before we started packing up. We all sort of understood that it wasn't just some guy, and that shooting it might not work. We didn't want to make it angry, I guess. And we certainly didn't want to stick around and see if it brought back any friends. We did check where it was standing and where it walked out of the woods, because it was the path that we had to take to get back down the hill. There was nothing suspicious that we found.
Recognizing a gun and the standoffish behavior probably means it wasn't a juvenile, but odd for a lone Wendigo to initiate contact like that. Might have encountered an elderly Wendigo kicked from the pack. They're a lot more tricky than aggressive, trying to draw you in rather than hunt you down.
All right, comrades, story time. Be 16-year-old me from Southern California. Gonna drive up to Oregon with my older brother and dad and stay a bit at Grandma's house. This is my first visit, so I don't know what to expect. Get there after a long-ass drive. It's a nice place that's pretty much Innawoods. There's a large front field that's fenced off from the road, and behind the cabin is a river bottom. The place is evidently a condo with another family, mom, dad, and their son, who's 17, my brother's age. That vacation next door from time to time. We get there at night and usual greetings occur. We get introduced to the family, who is in turn leaving after tomorrow. Fast forward to the next day, I made friends with next door kid who has an N64. Place is fairly rustic, but in a modern way. There's old farming tools hung up on the wall that have likely never been used, while the rest of the place is just like a wood-paneled suburb house, etc. We go back to town once that day and take in the little sights. Eat. It's good. Night comes and we're back at home base, and we do some stargazing since there's no town lights to block the sky out. Hear a 2 spooky bat flutter near us. Thought it was cool. There's a slight breeze going this whole time the field is making that eponymous whispering sound that only just drowns stuff out. Mind you, the setup looking forward from the front door is house, me, dad and bro, fenced off field road, woody woods. Think I see something from across the road. Dad states it's likely a deer, no shit Sherlock JPG. We decided to go in. Something about that thing didn't seem very deer-like, how it seemed to probe the surrounding area looking out in that instant. My bro and I share a tiny room just down a short hall to the front door's right. Sleep dreamlessly but wake up at ass o'clock with a cold sweat. I've always sucked at going back to sleep once I'm up, and I felt pretty awake. Decide to get a better lay of the house. There's a cool little cupboard-type area at the top of the stairs from the front living area on the way to Grandma's room. A large windowed exit to the patio with stairs down to the river bottom. Nothing too interesting. The front door isn't really a front door, more like one of those wrought iron frames with the mesh and a thin wooden semi-door. Only other front-facing window is from me and my bro's room, and trying to open that would likely wake him up. Open the thin door so there's just the mesh and wrought iron forming a window of sorts. A humanoid figure is in front of me. It's wrong looking though. It was hunched, obviously thin. Its forearms were unnaturally long and it was completely hairless so far as I could tell, dimly lit as it was by the front door light. It looked at me. It had those reflective eyes that cats do, but it was too small relative to its head. Tiny pinpricks in a vaguely discernible void of a face. Shut the door. Feels like my paws are on fire and my heart is at light speed. I nope away from the door as I hear the sound of gravel being stepped on, going towards the patio glass. I run to the cupboard with the biggest kitchen knife on the block and shut myself in, waiting. I wake up at the crack of dawn in there, and I promptly flip, since evidently I failed to keep watch. I crawl out and there's nothing out of the ordinary, and nobody is up yet. Put the knife back and crawl back to bed only 15 or so minutes before anyone else is up. I explain the bags under my eyes as difficulty sleeping in a new place to my dad. I try asking my brother about anything he may have seen and he just tells me to stop bullshitting. Can't say I'm surprised. We head out again for a few hours and get back by mid-afternoon. The next door family's car is gone, as expected. There's an unlocked door separating the two living areas, so naturally I try exploring out of boredom. Nothing is gone. Sporting equipment, baggage, any usual signs of packing up and leaving are wholly absent. Nothing's cleaned up either. I get back to our side before anyone notices I'm being creepy. I go looking around the place outside, and there's not anything indicating whatever I saw was there recently. I go around to the side of the neighbor's house, and it smells like there's this weird, musky scent everywhere. Never encountered anything like this, but I can only describe it as sour to the senses. Go around to the other side, and it only gets stronger, and rounding the corner, there's the wooden double doors to a cellar. It's wide open. I didn't see anything resembling a basement entrance while on the other family's side, so that must have been the only other entrance. Sorry to disappoint, but I didn't go down there. I just kicked the door shut and ran back. My dad would have me flayed alive before I could speak if he found out I was going into someone else's home like that, so I didn't even bother trying. Night comes and I do my best to keep face during dinner. Grandma's a good cook, so it wasn't too difficult, thankfully. I go to bed and this time I do dream. I don't remember the details, but I recall this sense of dread and isolation. And then I wake up again. I check my watch. It was the same goddamn time as before. I don't get out of bed for obvious reasons. I didn't hear footsteps this time, and I'll be forever grateful the blinds in the room window were drawn because right outside the wall I heard it. I knew it was that thing making the sound because I'd never heard of anything like this. It's like when people's cats talk, but this was lower and almost strained sounding. It almost sounded like it was talking or attempting to. I didn't want to know what it was saying though. I still don't. This goes on for a few minutes, me huddled under the covers, barely breathing with that thing just right outside gibbering. And like that, it's gone. Like someone stopped a recording, it just stopped. Fatigue grants me only several hours of sleep that night. It's our last day here, and I'm just waiting out the hours till the coming night. My brother and I, at the behest of our grandma, go down to the river bottom to maybe build a rock wall or do some Tom Sawyer-type bull. We decide to just walk along the sides of the river for a while and see what we can see. Naturally, I got the steep side opposite of the house as we set off. Fast forward 30 or so minutes and the slope is getting really friggin' steep, though the river is thinning out. I finally slip and barely catch myself in the rocks. I bruised my shin, but nothing serious. My brother comes over. "Are you all right?" And when he doesn't drop the issue, he explains the water looks rusty. I look down, and indeed it has a deep orangey tint to it, with barely tangible strands of red among it. In the smaller pebbles piled in there, I see a yellow-white speck and pick it up in a handful of dirt. I don't think I lost a tooth, but with the way your body deals with pain, sometimes you can't be sure. This very obviously didn't belong to a human. It was like an incisor, but double-pointed, yellowed, and it had grooves down the sides. I got a pit in my stomach, but my brother just said that it may have been a bear or something, and I should keep it as a souvenir. I throw it downstream as hard as I can and inform him we're going back now. I don't wait for him to catch up. He's a bit peeved, but I couldn't care less. Night comes, and thank God I didn't hear anything this time. In the morning, we're woken up by my dad yelling a "What the hell" out front. We pile out to see him shoveling something red into a red trash bag. Apparently there were parts of some small animal, likely a raccoon, piled just past the fence in front of the door. I just remain silent while they discuss what it could have been from, meant, etc. I'm already getting my things ready to leave. We left soon after as planned, and I did my best to put this behind me. I searched for similar occurrences and found the usual BS you'd expect on the subject. A few months later, I heard that the other family never returned to the place, and seeing as my grandma couldn't run the upkeep of the place on her own, she sold it. She always tried dropping the subject whenever it came up afterwards.
This occurred in the spring of 2018 while I was hiking the Appalachian Trail near the McAfee Knob in Virginia. I'd been hiking for a week at this point. I live in western North Carolina and was planning on about another 2 weeks on the Appalachian Trail. I've been on a ton of hikes, but this one was quite terrifying. It was mid-May and the scenery was breathtaking. I'd been hiking for about 5 hours that day when I decided to set up camp near a small brook. I was settling down for the night when I heard this rustling in the bushes nearby. Now, it wasn't the sort of rustling you would dismiss as a rabbit or a squirrel. This was louder and heavier. It sent a shiver down my spine. I remember thinking that maybe somebody else was out there or maybe a deer. I tried not to think about it, but the noise continued and in the exact same spot just off the campsite. It wasn't getting fainter or moving along, so I grabbed my flashlight and I headed towards the noise. As I was getting closer, the rustling stopped, but I could feel something. It's hard to explain, but it was like I could feel eyes on me. This feeling of being watched was overwhelming, like I was on display. I showed my flashlight around, but there was nothing to see, just trees and bushes and the blackness beyond my light. It was then that I heard it. I might even go so far as to say I felt it. There was a low growl, deep and guttural. I could feel it vibrate through the ground. I felt a sense of dread, like I was definitely in danger. My heart was racing and I was finding it hard to even breathe. My mind was yelling, "Get out of there," but my body wouldn't listen. Then something happened. This figure slowly emerged from the shadows. It wasn't just any figure. It was enormous and standing on 2 legs, silhouetted against the sparse moonlight. I felt my heart leap to my throat. I mean, we've all heard the stories, right, about Sasquatch or Bigfoot or whatever you want to call it. To actually see one, well, that is different. You have to remember that the light wasn't the best. There was no real moon that night, but when my flashlight hit the thing, I could see that it was gigantic. I mean, it was really tall. I'd say easily 8 or even 9 feet. It towered above me, giving off this sense of pure raw power that can completely overwhelm me. It was broad and its shoulders seemed as wide as a small car. No exaggeration. Its arms hung down almost to its knees, rippling with muscle under the hair that was matted and black, sort of blending with the shadows. Around its face, well, that's something I will never forget. It was more human-like than ape-like, but still not quite human. Its eyes were large and expressive, shining in the light with an intelligence that startled me. The nose was flat, more like ours than a bear or a wolf. The mouth, when it gaped open, I could see its teeth and even its breath as it exited its mouth in a slow stream of steam. The teeth were large and they looked very sharp. It was a terrifying sight, the kind of thing you would expect to see in a nightmare, not on a peaceful hike in the Appalachian woods. The sound it made was a deep rumbling growl that seemed to shake the very ground beneath me. There was like a primal rawness, a sort of power that you can't really put into words. Then suddenly it let out a roar that echoed through the forest, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Then, just as suddenly, it disappeared from the light of my flashlight. I swung the light slowly back and tried to pinpoint the thing's current location, but I couldn't see anything at all, just that I was alone again, standing there in the pitch black with my heart pounding. That's when I realized that sweat was pouring down from my face and my chest. I hadn't even been aware of what was happening to my body until just then. As you can imagine, I didn't sleep a wink that night. Every noise, every shadow had me on edge. I couldn't wait for the day to break. So just as soon as the sun started peeking over the mountains, I packed up my stuff and I headed onward. There was no real place to go but to continue on the Appalachian Trail. I cut the hike short. I didn't make those full final 2 weeks. I just couldn't get over what had happened. I will tell you that since the encounter I have been back to the Appalachian Trail, but never to that same spot. I can't say I'd ever want to see that section of the trail ever again.
Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. Pick related, but not of the family hometown, you'd have to imagine the Mexican state of Hidalgo in the 1800s. Literally a Wild West rush in mining and agriculture. And from its ancient history and natives, there was bound to be spooky shit involved. Be Farmer Juan, married to a beloved wife, hasn't aged a day since they met long ago. Farmer Juan runs a successful farm plot. Every weekend, wife prepares his favorite meal, morcilla. Cured sausage made with blood, diced meat, spices, and the good stuff. Life is so good, maybe Farmer Juan will get some kids. One day he goes out to tend to his farmland. Ah mierda, se olvido mi sombrero. Walks the road back to his home, hears his wife preparing something inside. Decides he should sneak a window peek before coming in. On the table he sees his wife chopping up mystery meat and skin. Beside the cutting board are similar mystery organs along with a tiny arm and leg. Even the same bowl they've used for the blood gathering of morcilla. What the hell is this? Isn't a pig or a pigling? Ay Dios mío y Santa Maria de Guadalupe. She is butchering a child. Farmer Juan nopes out of window peeping. Runs away to the town center to gather the sheriff and a mob. They all bum rush the wife to arrest her. By dawn she is burned at the stake before all the townsfolk. Farmer Juan forever cursed with the sins of eating kids and with his romance to a witch. There's a lot of hearsay stories across the country and state, but my grandmother swears that this is direct lore from the family hometown. Still creeps me out that unexplainable child disappearances in those mountains might be chalked up to a what-if witches.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.
There's also a Rumble archive as a backup.